Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded with Eric and I. Eric, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm still trying to digest yesterday's news from Apple about their VR AR headset that's costing $3,500. Don't know who it's for, and I'm curious to see what kind of use people will get out of that.
Well, you know what? If we had more H-1B talent here, they could probably get that price point down.
For
So,
real, for real. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Not sure if you checked it out or if any listeners checked it out. I'm not bought in on the whole AR VR thing yet, but I guess all these companies that we utilize every day are think it's the next big frontier. So who knows? We'll see.
that's what they used to say about the ATM and the microwave oven. Look at them now. They're staples.
There you go. There you go. But yeah, Finn, yeah, things are going good. Obviously, we took last week off, following the Memorial Day holiday here in the US. I think we have an awesome episode coming up with Dawn Sparling. What more can you tell us about our conversation with Dawn?
Yeah, Dawn was a really interesting chat. One, she's just a cool woman who has some cool stuff going on in her personal life that we got to dive into a little bit. But also, she's a career global mobility professional. Came up through the HR track. Pivoted early on into the global mobility and immigration space in house at companies, and has worked with several brands that our audience would be familiar with on their global mobility teams in the past. So she was just a wealth of knowledge. I really got to hear about her career trajectory and how she's been so successful in the global mobility industry.
Spot on, spot on. All right. Well, with that, we will hop into our conversation with Dawn Sparling. As always, don't forget to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube or follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, our conversation with Dawn Sparling. And now I'd like to welcome Dawn Sparling to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. Dawn, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much.
Awesome. And we are recording this, and you just completed a 20 plus hour road trip. How did that go?
I did. Yeah. Back to the Midwest for graduation, and it was good. Really good. Really great weather and all that kind of stuff. And was in the zone. So listening to some tunes. Got the 80s hit list yesterday and off of Apple Music. And oh my gosh, I think it lasted for like 4 hours. I was
Oh,
like, wow.
wow.
Yeah. But it played all the highlights
Who,
from my years. So,
who's your top 80s artist?
oh my gosh. Well, it's you're gonna Madonna, back in the day. I mean, that was,
Yeah.
she was like the coolest thing. So, yeah, but just some of the other ones, Howard Jones and just yes, Depeche Mode, all those
Mhm.
different. It just how music just brings you back.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm seeing Bruce Springsteen in
Oh yeah.
August at
Oh
Wrigley
yeah.
Field. So looking forward to
Oh,
that.
perfect. Yeah, he was yep, he was on the list too. So, Courtney
Nice.
Cox video, I can, see the whole thing
Yeah.
happening. MTV begged my parents to get MTV back in the day. So,
Love it. Love it. Well, Don, as much as we could talk about music
yeah,
and road trips, we definitely want to talk more with you about global mobility because you are an experienced global mobility professional. Um, can you tell us more about your journey in the global mobility space?
sure, yeah. So like most of us, nobody like really picks it. It kind of picks you. And so I think this is my 15th year in mobility. Um, and so back in the day, I was an HR generalist, and my boss came and said, "Hey, would you like to do this stuff with like international stuff?" And I'm like, yeah, anything different from, talking to employees about their complaints and leaders, which don't get me wrong, that is like one of the best places to start. But yeah, and so just kind of morphed from there. been a part of some big programs, and then recently a smaller program. So have really um, been able to see the breadth of different programs.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, we'll dive into some of that in just a moment. But just for some other fun questions, Don, you've lived in a few different places throughout your life. How have your experiences influenced the way you approach the different aspects of global mobility?
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I was on a panel last fall about relocation and stuff, and I really didn't think I had a lot to bring to it, but I moved from Iowa to Idaho, which everyone gets confused. So I'm in Boise, and the main thing that came to me in that move was that I may be in this profession and I tell people what they need to think about and those different things, but I didn't listen to my own advice. So different things. I was surprised about a couple things here in Idaho, which I don't know if other research would have really helped that out. But I just think that it just shows you that people don't know what they don't know. And so, as much as you can tell them some things that they may not even be thinking about because they don't know that it's going to be something, um, I think that's the biggest takeaway is to really guide them and to try to let them know the different things that they may not think about. Because I think moving is up there with like death, getting married, and changing jobs or something like that is the most stressful time in your life.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it's stressful enough moving apartments from one neighborhood to another. So I can only imagine if you're moving from another country to the U.S. and you have your family and all
Yeah.
your possessions and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Don, fun question that we Finn and I like to ask all of our guests, and just what are your hobbies, interests, and joys outside of work?
Yeah. Uh, so traveling is definitely something that's a big part of my life. I'm an empty nester and I'm by myself. So that's been something just really enjoy seeing other parts of the United States and the world. But also, I've picked up a hobby, and most people are not familiar with it, felting soap. If you've ever heard of that, probably not. Um,
Can you tell us more?
yeah, you just take wool and you like wrap it around the soap, and then you put it in hot water and it adheres, and yeah. So, and you can make little scenes on it, and yeah, it's just my little creative outlet. And then I grew up in the Midwest my whole life and pretty much lived there except for a couple different times, and then also traveling and things like that. But Idaho is just beautiful. The scenery, being outdoors, I mean, it's amazing. So I try to go hiking. I don't live too far from the Boise River, so you can float the river. Not right now. We've had tons and tons of snow in the mountains this year, so it's quite dangerous right now. But yeah, some of those things, just enjoying life.
Well, on the topic of enjoying life and traveling, one thing that's made that more accessible for millions of people in the past few years has been this mass adoption of remote work.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that's impacted your role as a global mobility specialist at the various organizations that you've worked for and worked with. Where, midway through 2023, where do you, in your personal opinion, think remote work is going as a corporate trend? And
Mhm.
how will it continue to impact folks who, are traveling overseas to the United States to immigrate here?
Yeah, yeah. So, a year ago, we probably would have said like everyone's going to be remote 100%, that kind of stuff. And so I think with the economy and just some, of the different articles and things like that, and just other things that I'm plugged into that I've seen is that, companies are starting to kind of rein that back in a little bit because I think, the worst phrase ever probably for mobility is work from anywhere. right, anywhere from the country that you already live in, and I think, the generation that's graduating from college, that's, excited to be out in the world, took that as, oh, I can go work in France for a while, and then the UK, and then whatever, and so that's the biggest challenge that I saw come in was, no, uh, the company that I had just worked for, really was about making sure we had an entity. And that was very important. And then, some timing around it as well. But people just don't, they don't think about that. And they don't think, unfortunately, I think we Americans, are a little, maybe jaded, or just we just feel like we can kind of move around wherever we want, even though we have some significant things happening on the southern border and things like that, but people don't put themselves in that. I would remind people, you're doing what we don't like people to do, when you're going to another country and you're not having the proper work authorization and those kinds of things. But I think it's just, the big companies that had said, work from anywhere. And that's another thing too. If you're working from, you have a smaller company, I mean, yeah, Amazon can, they have so many entities, they can probably support all that, but when you are a smaller company, that's not something that you can support. So I think, it's now companies are looking back at that to say, what do we really want to allow? It's not that they don't want to allow remote work, but kind of reining that in and getting some more policies and procedures around that.
There was sort of a, I don't want to say a fear, but an insinuation that maybe, perhaps the rise of remote work would stop the flow, or the need for foreign talent from overseas to immigrate to the US to work here, right? Because they could just, in theory, continue to do that job in their home country. Why go through the hassle and
Yeah.
have a company spend money to sponsor them if they can just do that job in wherever their home country is? But that hasn't been the case in the last 3 years. There's been an
No.
increased demand for visas
Right.
in the U.S.
Yeah.
In your experience, what explains that disconnect? Why do you think employers are still so still really want to have those foreign employees come to the U.S. and work in an office space and contribute to the
Mhm.
team in that way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're seeing it just with, the popularity of AI and different things like that, right? I mean, AI is great. It's here to stay. It's not leaving, but the human component, and that's probably too what we realized, when going through the pandemic, is that we're not meant to be isolated. And so we do need to work together. I mean, even myself, the last 3 years, I've been working 100% remote. And so for me, I didn't have a requirement to come into the office at all. But, I would I went to California for the 10-year company anniversary. I go to conferences and stuff just to make those connections. And so what I saw was that, and especially in the tech industry, really that collaboration, if you truly do want to have that collaboration, and really, I think from a cultural perspective, you can't quite get it until you're in an office setting, until you're immersed in it. Because even me being in the work world for a long time and like, I don't know that I need to go in, whatever. I mean, I missed it, but I was able also to see my company's culture when I went to California and really, really get that. So I think, I don't think, I don't think that's going away. Plus, I think too, the people that are immigrating here, it's for other reasons as well. It's for work, but it's also, for their family, for their well-being of their life. I mean, a new, buzzword that, the HR field is throwing around now, instead of work-life balance, they're saying life work balance. So they've switched it around, right? So what's going to be best for my life and how do I fit that in with work?
Yeah, on that same note, I mean, and we you touched on it a little bit before of, recent graduates maybe getting a remote work job or a job where they can work remotely and wanting to travel to different countries and work while in those different countries. How do you advise and manage your employees who are working remotely to ensure that, like you were speaking about before, they stay compliant with
Yeah.
those countries' regulations? How do you interact with them and communicate that message to them?
Yeah. It's really about understanding what they're planning on doing, the place, their personal, um, country of origin, their nationality. Uh, because really, one place that I focused on was taxes. And people don't understand how they can kind of get in a pickle with taxes, and until you educate them. So I think that's the bigger piece, is to really educate them and to say, okay, if you're going for 2 weeks or whatever, and okay, maybe that's all right, but make sure that you aren't working. If you're just traveling, you really don't need to work. That's the other thing I said to people. I mean, if you're going on a vacation to Europe, like I went to Italy last summer for a couple weeks, and I didn't take my computer. I mean, take the time off. Like, we don't have to. I think that's one thing too during the pandemic. Like, we started working like all hours of the day and night, and that's not sustainable. And you get time off. So take the time off. I realize there's going to be some things, but as much as possible, but again, I think it's back to the education and back to explaining, oh, if you're in this country, Europe, it's a Schengen, those kinds of things. And your personal vacation counts against that too, and they're like, wait, but I'm not working. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So I think it's back to that education and just really understanding the facts. And just because their friend so and so did it, doesn't mean that they have the same fact pattern and that it'll be the same for them.
Don, a couple months ago, you did a presentation on the various work models. Obviously, we've been talking the last few minutes about remote work, but we also have hybrid and going into the office. Um, what In that presentation you talked about what employees desire in their work setup. Can you talk a little bit more about that presentation and if what employees desire has changed since you gave that presentation?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it has. I mean, I think when I was looking at that, some of the data was showing that, they definitely want flexibility, which I think that that's still there. And again, just probably more having the opportunity to connect with people. I mean, not that that's still not important, but I think at that time when I was doing the presentation, we thought things were going to be, hybrid, or they could potentially be fully remote. And so I really think what's changing is that, it's not just buzzwords really anymore, but it is about your life and how are you fitting that with work. And I think people really had an opportunity to reset what was important to them. And so I think too, the generation that's graduating from college this year happens to be one of my children, my daughter. And, those kids went in on both sides. They went in and came out on both sides of the pandemic. So they went in 19, they were in college for a while, and then pandemic, and then they were remote for a while, and then, in the hybrid kind of thing. And now then they came out and things are changing. So I think that dynamic of those people working, plus two, we have four generations in the workforce. And so I think the people that are more, maybe a little bit older than me, I'm not quite the oldest generation in the workforce, but, they just, they came in at a different time, and what was important to them at the time was, having that, butt in the seat, so to speak, and that you were there working and that everyone saw you and those kinds of things. I mean, I remember those days. And I think people just want to have that opportunity to, I'll get my job done. Like, I'm a professional, treat me like a professional. And if I have objectives and things like that to get my job done, however I do that is up to me to a certain degree. Obviously, if what you're doing, impacts others, or you have deliverables to others, you have to kind of work through that. But I do really think people want to have that autonomy over their jobs. And even though maybe they have hybrid, like, they still, I mean, I'm kind of in this space, like, I don't want somebody telling me I have to be at the office Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Doesn't mean that I don't want to go to the office, but why does it have to be those days? And they would say, well, because you need to connect and we need to have everybody there. But I mean, I think we're seeing that that's not happening, though. People are still not coming in. So I'm more of a fan. And what I talked about was being intentional about when you're bringing people in for celebrations, for specific collaboration, for those kinds of things. And I think people can get behind that. But when it's a little more arbitrary, they're just like, why? That doesn't make sense.
For sure. Yeah, I think we've seen quite a few stories in the last few months. I know in New York City, I think their office rate is like 60%, and it's not budging any higher. And out on the West Coast, you have all the tech workers that are still, like you said, they're questioning why they have to come in on these arbitrary days if they're able to get their work done, get their tasks done, in the comforts of their own home or somewhere else.
Well, and honestly, too, with the focus on mental health, I mean, I think too, we may have some of it, because I know I've experienced it a little bit, where I've been away from an office for so long that it does give you a little bit of like, anxiety to a certain degree, to like, okay, I have to go back in, I have to be with all these people. And I'm an extrovert, like total extrovert. But I think, people that aren't, and then if I put my HR hat on, um, I just worked successfully for 3 years, 100% remote. So why do I have to come back into the office? I think that's a hard sell to say, no, your job requires that you be in the office.
Hmm.
I don't know,
Yeah.
it didn't for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Um, what advice or words of wisdom do you have if there is a foreign national employee who, maybe they are feeling pressure to come in because they're here in the U.S. on like a work visa or going through the green card process, but their
Yeah.
superiors is kind of, you know having setting these arbitrary days to come in, but the foreign national is feeling pressured. How might one navigate that type of situation?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, having that discussion to understand, what's driving that, what's behind that. Again, is it arbitrary, or is there some sort of, uh, thought process behind it, the intention behind it? I mean, I know too, a lot of companies, one company I know as well, like, they have leases on buildings until like the 2030s, And so, but honestly, but I mean, if that's the reason that, like, hey, we've got these buildings and people need to be in them, okay, well, then I'd rather hear that reason than to just say, well, no, you need to be here. Just be like, you know what, we have to have it occupied, and the company's paying for it, and we can't get out of the lease. And because of that, we're going to provide free lunches and, different things like that. But I know for nationals specifically can feel like, maybe they're being singled out. And so I would say, just having that conversation to try to maybe get that understanding, making sure that is it their entire team? And then, of course, always, they can go to HR if they have a concern to say, hey, you know what, I've researched this, and it appears, from my perspective, maybe I'm the only one that's being asked to come in for this, why is that? But I think just again, I think it's really just having all the facts and really just treating it like that, like and treating it with that they have the best intentions. Their management does have good intentions. I mean, maybe they feel like they need to just meet more people or, they need to be engaged more to kind of help them facilitate their role. But sometimes, people aren't very good about stating that kind of stuff.
For sure, for sure. Don, zooming out a little bit, and talking global mobility as a whole, can you what are your thoughts on how the industry has changed from when you first started to
Mhm.
now, almost end of May 2023?
Yeah. Yeah, it's changed a lot. I think, mobility was just kind of one of those things that, oh yeah, you have to do something with it and only a few people know about it. And like immigration, oh my gosh, don't even tell leadership about that because they're like, just do what you gotta do. This person needs to be in X spot at X time for so long. Those were the early days, of course, spreadsheets and everything manual and that kind of stuff. Although the lottery was a lot better then. Uh, but I think it's just really elevated. And I think through education and educating upper level leadership, I can't talk, to really let them know and understand what value mobility brings that, you're wanting to bring, foreign nationals in the US. And, we're working on these things to get these people in the places so that you can support the business needs. And so I think mobility is really, really a lot of education, and, definitely elevating it to a level where a lot of people do have a better understanding. There's still some growth that needs to happen. But, a lot of times mobility people feel a little bit like, kind of the person, the stepchild off to the side, if you will, that, nobody pays attention to and nobody sees what they're doing. So I do think that that's happening. And then, of course, too, with I'm a big proponent of um, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we've been talking a lot about that in the mobility space, but I really am seeing a little more traction on that. And what does that really mean? How do you get people that maybe typically wouldn't be considered for assignments on assignment or, really making sure that things are inclusive when somebody is on an assignment that we wouldn't have thought back in the day, it would have been your stereotypical male with family, male with spouse and children, and so that has changed. It's got a ways to go. But I definitely see it, moving in the right direction.
So, going off of how the mobility industry has changed, and just providing the information to key stakeholders, especially senior leadership. One question that Finn and I see a lot is like, do I need a global mobility plan? Um, Along if that plan needs to be written or documented in some way. How would you address this question? And is that something that you've put together in your career?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been at companies where there's been uh, guidelines or policies. There's been 20, 30, or more different policies. And I've also been at a place where there weren't any policies. And so I definitely think again, it depends on the culture. But I think in order to be inclusive and in order for people to understand what their options are, what's available, it does need to be there needs to be something. And especially typically larger companies, have these big plans out there and programs and those kinds of things. And, gone are the days of providing, the Cadillac, if you will, let's just provide the Toyota because that's enough. But I really think it's concentrating on some of those core things. I talked about Core Flex on another program, and I think, whether it's called Core Flex or whether you call it something else, but just again back to that sentiment that people don't know what they don't know. And so if you tell them, you're going to need temporary housing because you're not going to find this, or you're going to need cultural training, because really, even though you've visited 10 times to this country, it's different when you move your entire family. I think really guiding them and making sure. So I think at a minimum, there needs to be, guidelines or something that, because it's about the experience, right? And again, we've come off this pandemic where, people have managed themselves at home, but how do they manage themselves in this type of an assignment, or coming into a new location? And so I think that's our role, is to make sure that they have a good experience and that they can be productive, right? Because that's what it's meant to be, is that they can get their job done and they don't have to worry about all the other stuff in the background. And so I think those are the important pieces, whether it's guidelines, policies. I think you can split it so many different ways, and that just gets too hard to manage. So I'm not a fan of 20 or 30 different things, but really just getting some of the basic information at least documented.
Definitely helpful. Dawn, curious, what was the most complex mobility manner that you've experienced, and how did you navigate it?
Yeah. So it's a little bit odd one, but it really was. I mean, at a time, um, when I worked for an aerospace company, we were sending people to Afghanistan and Iraq. And so they were embedded with the US military during the time when the military was there. And, contractors and things like that doing work for the military, because the communication systems and things like that were on military vehicles were something that my company made. And so just kind of managing the experience with the military when you have that military environment as well. And so you have military rules, but you also have company rules. And then one situation, which is, it is a little bit tragic, is that we had somebody die while they were there, and it wasn't because of like military activity. They had a medical crisis, and so they died. And so literally getting that person's remains back to the United States, and working through all that and working through the military to try to do that, because they could take the remains to Dover Air Force Base, and they had to do an autopsy because the person passed on military base, but they wouldn't embalm him. And so I had to work with International SOS and, and actually just locally and things like that on the East Coast to try to get that all navigated, and the family. And, so I never would have thought that would have happened in my time in mobility, but I'm glad that, I am an empathetic person, and that I was able to step in and try to, make it as seamless as possible for the family. And I think that's one thing that most of us pride ourselves on, is that we are about helping people and making sure that they're not having to navigate some of these things, whether it's that type of crisis, an illness. I mean, I know during COVID, there's people that got stuck different places. Those were some things too that happened, some of those quarantine periods in different Asian countries. I mean, some of the places they were staying were not nice. But we didn't have a lot of control over that. And so, just making them feel like they have somebody to talk to, even if they just want to vent, you know, or if they do need, help with something, that we can do that.
Final question on my end, then I'll turn it back to Finn. Are there areas of global mobility you expect to become more important and top of mind in the next 5 or so years?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I think the diversity and inclusion, I think, is getting some traction. Um, you know, just in general, the way that the world is, we don't have the stereotypical families anymore. So I think opening that up, especially to a workforce coming out of college that is wanting to have some flexibility, they're wanting to be able to travel and have, different experiences. I think sustainability has been coming out quite a bit. And so really looking at that, the carbon footprint, those kinds of things. How does mobility fit into that, especially when, you're moving goods, those kinds of things, just waste that maybe is produced by a move. So I do think those things. And also, too, one thing that's been interesting is, again, back to the whole mental health. So really, concentrating on how are you making sure that people are assimilating or feeling connected, or those kinds of things in a new location, or perhaps for a short-term assignment or a long-term assignment or a permanent move. And the company taking some responsibility for that as well, as the whole person, because companies offer EAPs and all those kinds of things like in home, but how does that go to another country? There's different options that may be available, but there's also some more, software that's available now. I think technology is a huge one too, really moving mobility into the tech space and making sure that we're using technology, because it's super important from a reporting perspective, just from the ease of doing things. Gone are the days of the entering stuff into spreadsheets and, having formulas and all that kind of stuff that I used to have to do for cost estimates. I mean, so that technology already exists, but I think, there's just going to be more and more technology, in the next 5 years, especially with AI too. I'm sure AI will fit in there as well. Maybe we have a little robot that goes with the person to make sure that they're good, or they have a special bot that checks in, with them. I don't know.
I don't know, until we have jetpacks like in the Jetsons,
I
I
know,
don't think we're
right?
gonna have anything cool,
Yeah.
cool AI for work, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I know.
Um, well, on that note, I mean, you just kind of laid out a few, ever-present trends in the global mobility industry, and you've been in that space for 15 years, as you mentioned earlier. What advice would you give to somebody maybe just getting started in the global mobility industry, or somebody who's aspiring to make the move to the global mobility industry in 2023?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think it's really just getting some education about it. I talked to the University of Idaho students about mobility, and I'm on the Puget Sound, Relocation Council as well. And there's been a couple people that have talked to them as well. And I think, like I said before, most people just kind of like fall into mobility. And so really understanding that it is a career and that there are nuances, and it's not just about moving people's things, that it really is taking care of the entire person, their job, those kinds of things. So I would encourage, someone to get connected with, anyone, in the mobility space on LinkedIn, or, if they know other people, or even if they're already in a company, a lot of times like recruiting, because they have connections from an immigration perspective with mobility. A lot of times recruiters aspire to go, to kind of move into that path. And so just really understanding that there are different pieces of mobility, and can be quite complex in some areas, such as tax or immigration. And I think, my family still thinks, I just like move people. They don't get it. And then, occasionally they'll hear me talking, my kids will hear me talking about stuff, and they're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. So I think just really it is a niche area. And so just connecting yourself with a relocation council, or with some people in the industry, because we're a small group, honestly, when you think about it, but we're pretty well connected, and we're more than happy to talk about mobility because we all love it. And and we just want to bring other people into it.
Yeah, final question for me on that. Are there any specific trainings or any resources that aspiring global mobility professionals could maybe leverage to set themselves up for a career in global mobility?
Yeah. So there's the Worldwide ERC organization is basically the main organization that most mobility professionals are part of. And there's conferences that they have. I think memberships a couple $100 maybe, but there's a global mobility specialist certification, and that gives you some general information about mobility. There's one too that includes like talent with that as well. And so those would definitely be a great resource to start looking at. And they have all kinds of articles and information, and there's a mobility magazine, those kinds of things. So yeah, great place to start.
Yeah, I think Eric and I both subscribe to the Mobility Minute newsletter, which is always
Yes.
a great resource.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's great too.
Worldwide ERC.
Mhm.
Well, Dawn, this has been a really engaging and terrific discussion. I just want to leave the floor to you before we wrap it up here. Any final thoughts on any topics that we didn't hit on, or anything coming up in your professional or personal life that you want to plug? Any events, any
Yeah.
more road trips that you're doing that you want to share with
Yeah.
the audience?
So yeah, a couple things. So the Puget Sound Relocation Council summer meeting we just put out the date. So it's July 27th in Seattle. So if you happen to be in that area, sign up for that. It's free. It doesn't cost anything for corporate members to go. There's suppliers there as well, but it's just a really great opportunity to connect with people and network. And like I said, it's kind of my outlet for, being a remote worker, and, and who doesn't love to go to Seattle? Plus the plane tickets, like nothing, to fly there. And then me personally, I actually, I left my company about 5 weeks ago, and I am on a journey. I am on a adult gap year is what I'm calling it. I'm keeping a toe in mobility, so still trying to stay connected. I'm going to launch some stuff on Insta and probably on LinkedIn as well. But yep, probably some trips, Canada, Alaska, going to India, probably Ireland. So there's some travel in there, but really just kind of pausing. And I would recommend that to everyone. It's okay to maybe pause for a bit and kind of feel, see what resonates with you, and where you want to go. I haven't had a break from working for 21 years. So, I decided why not? So, but I'll be in the mobility space. I love it, and staying, engaged in that. And so, yeah, it's going to be a great year.
That's so awesome. Well, congrats on getting to the point where you can achieve that gap year. And I really hope, and I can speak for both Eric and I, that you have a terrific time in all of your travels. And we hope to follow it on social media a little bit, and check in. And maybe you can come back on the podcast a year from now and tell us all the exciting
Absolutely.
lessons that you learned from your personal travels.
Yeah, that would be great.
Eric, any final questions for Dawn, or?
No, I think we hit on everything. Yeah, I mean, India is a lot of fun. I went to India a couple years ago, actually, like right as the pandemic was starting. I
Oh
got
my
home.
goodness.
Yeah, I got
It,
home probably like a good 3 weeks before the world turned upside down,
well, that's
and
good that you
then
made it home.
yeah, for real. And then I'm also going to Alaska this summer in late August
Have you been?
for no,
Oh
no.
my gosh. I've been 2 times in the last year. It's amazing. I have a friend that lives in Anchorage.
Okay.
It's the most stunning place I've ever experienced. And I'm going to Chennai, India. I'm actually going for a wedding. So
Oh,
I'm
Oh, that'll be
yes.
super
awesome.
excited about
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And I've been
That's
to Bangalore, not Bangalore. I've been to Hyderabad a couple times.
mm,
So yeah, yeah,
nice, nice. Well, I'll have to follow up separately for some
for,
Anchorage and other
please,
Alaska places to visit.
for sure.
Um, but yeah, Dawn, it was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. Um, and thank you so much for hopping on the show. Thanks. You
Thank you,
too.
Don. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone.